Anish, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
We'll do intros anyway, but I'm Ganesh, one of the co-founders at Cortex, and you are my other co-founder.
That is true, yes. We've been working together now for, 7 years? 6 years.
6 years on Cortex and
Yeah.
more years beyond that.
Yeah, exactly.
This one's going to be an interesting one. A lot of our listeners are engineering leaders, VPs of engineering, CTOs, staff
Yeah.
engineers who want to understand how to run engineering organizations. And I thought what might be interesting today was just talking about our journey as founders.
Yeah.
We started with absolutely nothing,
Yeah.
building a product from scratch. And, we've delivered this product now to over 100 customers of different shapes, sizes, and industries.
Yeah.
And the way we think about the product that we ship has changed. And I think
Dramatically.
it might be interesting to kind of just walk through that journey and talk about how our own mindset as founders have changed to give
Yeah.
our listeners an idea of, where they might be in this journey and how they should be thinking about their own responsibilities as engineering leaders and
Yeah.
kind of go from there. What do you think about that?
I think that's a great plan. Let's do
All
it.
right. So let's go back all the way to day one. We decided, we wanted to build this thing called a service catalog that didn't exist yet. I remember me and Nikhil, our other co-founder, started working on the back end,
Yeah.
and we were kind of just hacking features together. We're like, how is this gonna work? We
Yeah.
gotta build a service catalog. We decided, we're gonna use these YAML files, and that's gonna be like the core of everything. So we started building around this.
Yeah.
And you started working on the front end.
Yeah.
You want to tell us a little bit about how the front end came together? Like, what was the first UI? How did we build it? You were our front end engineer for like
I
6
was a
months.
front engineer, yeah.
Yeah, you want to tell us how that went?
Yeah. I mean, thankfully I was an engineer for a little bit, so I knew how to code. And I wish vibe coding was a thing back then, but because it wasn't, I think we would have actually moved like infinitely faster if that was a thing. But yeah, I mean, it was a simple React based app. And honestly, I mean, we just iterated to try to we were trying to find product market fit. And so I don't think we were even thinking about, I mean, I certainly wasn't thinking about how does this scale or what does the architecture look like. It was just, how do we get something quick to test in the hands of potential customers? And, in the early days, like we didn't have anything that any enterprise customer would want. And it's ironic because the problems that Cortex solves are fundamentally much more prevalent in larger enterprises. And obviously larger enterprises have way more core requirements on what they expect from the products that they deliver. But we didn't have any of that. I mean, we didn't have on-prem, we didn't have RBAC. I mean,
Couldn't handle scale.
we couldn't handle any scale.
I remember the first front end was like we downloaded some React template from some
Yeah.
website, and it came with
Yeah.
some design components and stuff that we just kind of hacked together. And
Yeah.
obviously we've come a far, far away from that. But I think it's just a good reminder of like, we just had to figure out,
Yeah.
do people even care about this problem?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were building something that just literally did not exist in the world. Like, we had no one to even look to it as an example. And these concepts that I think now are kind of table stakes for every engineering leader, like the idea that you need some sort of system of record. I think back then, I mean, we would get people that ask us, what are you actually building with a service catalog? Like, they confuse it for all sorts of other applications. And I think, honestly, I think it was probably good that we didn't over engineer it, honestly,
Yeah.
in the beginning, because so many things did change. But what's interesting is like the architecture decisions that you and Nikhil made early on ended up being very competitive in a great way for us. And I think it's helped like the YAML files are still kind of the way people think about their services and import data. But we've just added a ton more automation now, and so you don't have to maintain it. But back then, yeah, I remember even like you having Swagger as the specification for like these YAML files. It just made it so much easier, I think, in like even when we were building for scale later in the year.
And let's talk about why speed was so important for us. I mean, we used to be in competitive deals and we would ship features literally overnight, and
Yeah.
we wouldn't think about the architecture. We wouldn't think about, the scalability of it.
Yeah.
But we were moving fast. We would ship things literally within 24 hours.
Yeah.
Like big features that, ended up becoming really, really important.
Yeah.
But yeah, why was speed so important? Like, why were we optimizing for speed over anything else? Because obviously we've had to go back and rebuild a lot of those things now.
Yeah. We did.
Those things crashed and they didn't scale, and but people cared about those features.
Yeah.
But why was that the case back then? Why was speed so important?
Well, I think speed is the only thing you have when you're a startup. When you have nothing to your name and you're just trying to figure out what customers want and you're trying to win deals. I think speed is what gets you loyalty from customers. Speed gets you, it just drives urgency. And I think that's kind of always been the cultural ethos of the company, especially on the engineering team. Now, I will say that it's hurt us a little bit in times too, right? Like we've certainly, there was a period of like 7 or 8 months, I think last year, where, a lot of the things that we shipped super, super quickly, yeah, they didn't scale, right? Like we had a few customers where they imported millions of entities and we had never handled that kind of scale before. And we honestly weren't ready for it. But back then, I mean, speed was, I think speed, a lot of our early customers recognized that. And when we would hear something on a call and then the next day just ship it. And I think people appreciate that.
Yeah. I mean, I think we had customers from back then that are still customers today, literally just because we were so responsive and we, like you said, they would ask for something and we
Yeah.
would ship it. And I think it was so important because, like you said, nothing like Cortex existed in the market. And so we were literally just trying things. We didn't know what an IDP was. We didn't know what a service catalog was supposed to do.
Yeah.
And, that's the gift and the curse of being the first mover. I mean, we've seen over the years how many of our competitors have
Yeah.
copied all the things we built. But,
Yeah.
for us, it was really about trying things and just shipping things and seeing what stuck and what didn't stick. And I
Yeah.
think that's why it was so important. Because a lot of it, when you think about it from a go-to-market perspective, and I think that's what, some engineering teams to struggle with today is there is a go-to-market component of it as well, right? It's
There is.
how do you take something to market and see how people react to it?
Yeah.
Do they understand what it's supposed to do? Do they understand the message? And the easiest way to get that information is to ship the thing,
Yes.
and get in people's hands and see how people react and see how people use it.
Yeah.
And so I think that's why that speed was so important. And you have an opportunity to come back and fix those things, for further down the road.
Yeah.
But
And people don't realize, I mean, we were a platform from day one. We had to be, right? Like when Backstage came out and helped define the concept of an internal developer portal,
a year and a half into our journey, we'd already launched, almost 2 years before that.
And it quickly changed the perception of what an IDP should be from just a service catalog to, there was self-service and plugins. And obviously, I think we also introduced scorecards to the world, and that's now become table stakes for any IDP. But maintaining a platform from day one is crazy. I mean, like most products just have a single use case and a single buyer, and you really just focus and you're able to build. That focus helps you, I think. For us, we were spread thin for a long time. We would have customers who would have radically different use cases early on. Some people would, workflows was like the number one thing that they needed to do. Some had scorecards, some were just focused on the catalog. And I think it's stabilized now as people have adopted IDPs. But back then, I mean, we would have, I think one of the unfortunate parts of that is we would have like engineers just siloed working on very specific projects, because we just had to get things out.
Yeah. And I think, it's interesting. Speed is even more important in some ways if you're attacking an industry that already exists.
Yeah.
Because, you might be facing incumbents with deep pockets that are well capitalized who can throw money at the problem. And so as a startup, the only thing that you have is your ability to out execute and innovate.
Yeah.
And I think we have definitely taken that to our advantage. I think being in a new market, you have the advantage of being the first mover because you're building things that people didn't even know they wanted. And so you have that time advantage because you're ahead of the pack. But if you can do that and be quick, then you're doubling down on that mode. You're shipping new things that people don't even realize they need, or other competitors don't even realize they should be building. But by the time they realize they should be, you've already down 4 capabilities ahead. And so I think, it's been really important for us even to this day, finding that balance between speed and quality. But, on that note, let's talk about, when that mindset shifted.
Yeah.
Obviously we care way more now about quality and scale and reliability than we ever did before. When, as founders, would you say our mindset shifted, and why?
Cortex quickly changed from a platform that, when we first started the company, we were like we talked about, we didn't know what the use cases would really develop, and there was so much exploration. And what I think shifted for us, I mean, I remember when we signed our first $1 million customer, it was like, I think 3 years ago, and they put Cortex in the same category that they put Jira in terms of stability, and it was like written in the contract. And the reason is it became mission critical, right? And like we're now in the literal path for certain customers, even like you can't even deploy if Cortex is down, you won't be able to deploy your service. And so I think that meant very, very quickly the internal culture had to change as well to kind of match the seriousness that customers put into the product, especially when you're talking about helping with incident management or anything that like 1% extra downtime for these customers is millions of dollars. And so you have to start taking it seriously then. But I think the interesting thing is changing culture can be hard too, right? Like people are used to just the company. We've always prided ourselves on moving as quickly as possible, and especially for the go-to-market team, right? It can feel like a little bit of a shift. Like, hey, things felt like they were coming out every single week. What's going on? We're taking a little bit longer, but the end result is the quality has gone way, way up too. And I think it's interesting because I do wish we had started a little bit earlier. But I think it was the customer demand that just forced it.
Yeah. I think the other thing I think about is market proof. Like once you have proof in the market that like, hey, this is a thing that matters, that we care about, that there's some foundation, maybe you're still iterating on what variation of the product and capabilities are the ones that's going to stick. But you found evidence that like generally the thing you're building is valuable.
Yeah.
At that point you can say, okay, well, we should invest in the foundations that, maybe we may build new features on top of that.
Yeah.
But the core foundations are the same. And I think that's been an interesting journey as well. Like knowing now that IDPs are so central to so many organizations, going from what is a service catalog and why do I need one to we cannot deploy without the service catalog and the information in it, I think is proof that, okay, well, the service catalog probably should be rock solid and you should invest in those foundations and whatnot. So I think there's like, as founders, it's having visibility into the market dynamics and how that's shifting as well. I think that's been a really interesting part of it. And I think the other thing, your point about go to market, I think is really interesting because you're not just changing the perception from outside the company, we're changing the perception from inside the company as well.
Yeah.
And so how do you tell a story internally that quality and reliability really matter? And I think it's about showing them why it matters to customers.
Yeah.
And then eventually, I think it can be a competitive differentiator.
Absolutely.
We see today, none of our competition can handle the kind of scale that we can.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. We've been through that pain and we've invested in our platform foundations. And now I think Cortex is the only IDP that can handle millions and millions of entities and scorecard millions of entities and ingest all this data from different integrations. And I think eventually that quality and reliability becomes a moat, because if you're trying out the product and one product works and the other product crashes, which one are you going to choose?
That's exactly right.
And I think that's an interesting transition that's happened in our market, is our ability to be consistent and reliable is one of the reasons people choose Cortex.
Yeah, I completely agree. And fun fact, you and Nikhil wrote tests even when it was just like the three of us. So I think we've always tried to adhere to quality, but I completely agree with you. I mean, the scale that we can handle now, it gives us confidence to support any type of customer, and I think it's also, we have to give a lot of credit to the customers that did have that pain for a little bit. It definitely was a little bit tricky to navigate.
We wouldn't be here without them for sure.
Exactly. Yeah. And But yeah, I think those moments, I think it really defined the engineering culture in a very positive way. I think like everyone on the engineering team can probably vividly remember those few months where we were just constantly barraged with skill that we'd never seen before. And it's like champagne problems in some sense, because it's like, okay, that means people are taking your product more seriously. But yeah, it was just a good reminder that, you know, it can quickly erode trust too if you
Yeah.
don't show customers that you're actually actively working on these things.
No, absolutely. I want to talk about that testing thing really quickly because I bet people are wondering why on earth, when we had 0 customers and we were just building the product, me and Nikhil write tests. And it was basically a way for us to get leverage because we knew that if we ship something, how do we make sure that whatever we had shipped was not going to break? And so by having tests, it meant we could focus on the next thing and the next thing and the next thing without going back to think about the old stuff. And so, I mean, it sounds obvious that that's the
Yeah.
whole point of testing. But even as a startup, even as a 3-person team, it was so useful for us because we were able to say, like, I don't even have to think about that stuff that we wrote
Yeah.
6 months ago. There's good tests. We'll figure out that later. We're going to focus on the next feature
Yeah.
that we need to go and push to market. So it actually like ended up being really, really high leverage for us over the years. So
Yeah.
if anyone's listening and wondering, like, should I be writing tests as a startup? Especially now with AI, I mean, you really have no excuse
Yeah.
to not be writing tests. It's
Yeah.
so much easier.
It's true. And you know, it's interesting, like that writing the tests is one example of something I think that's not, I don't think a lot of startups would have done that. Another really interesting thing that I don't think a lot of people also know is we supported on-prem very early. I mean, our first customer was an on-prem customer,
It's true.
and that just added an insane layer of complexity. And obviously, it's very hard to support on-prem deployments, and it's you know, I think thankfully most of our customers are cloud today, but you know, how I'm curious to get your perspective. Like, what would you say to someone who's thinking about supporting an on-prem product, especially as a startup?
That's a great question. I think going back to our earlier point, it's about proving out the market. And I think for IDPs, if I had to do it all over again, I would have made the same decision in our market because, the interesting thing about what we're doing is IDPs are all about data. It's all about the information. It's about the context. And I think Cortex connects to so many different things and pulls in so much rich information about your engineering organization that it was very difficult back in the day to convince customers that they should do that. They've never done this before. I mean, think about it. What other platform gets access to HR data and security data and observability data and on-call data? Like, we were probably the first tool in most of our customers' toolkit that had connections to all these things. And so going back in that day and trying to convince people like, oh, you should give us access to 15 different tools was probably a very difficult uphill battle. So I think I would do it all over again if I had to.
Yeah.
But I think it depends on the industry.
For
Like,
sure.
if you are building a better version of something that already exists, you probably shouldn't fight that fight.
Yeah.
Like it's, especially in an AI first world, it's probably easier to build capabilities in the cloud first. Like, so I think it depends. Though there are some businesses where supporting on-prem is a competitive differentiator, but I think it really just depends on the customer. But I think, talking about AI and going back to the idea of speed, I think a lot of organizations are starting to internalize that speed is suddenly becoming a critical thing, not just for startups, for even for big companies.
Yeah.
Because if you can ship more, you can ship more features, then with AI, then everyone needs to be shipping more. So it's not just for startups anymore; it's for bigger companies. And so, like, how do we think about balancing now, or how should engineering organizations think about balancing speed and shipping fast with AI, no matter the size, with the things that we're thinking about now around reliability and quality? And like, how do those things align? Because it's not just for startups anymore; it's for everyone.
I completely agree with you. If we get the privilege of working with every single one of our customers has introduced probably a coding assistant at this point, right? And I mean, the reality of it, honestly, is I think the introduction of these systems has 100% increased speed, and you can see it in these large. I mean, like, look at the earnings call of Meta and Google, and I mean, all of these companies are seeing now massive revenue. Even ServiceNow, right? Massive revenue jump because of investments in AI, their own AI products, And you're seeing enterprises move quickly and totally change their entire strategy around AI, and it is speed, right? But I also think that there's huge ramifications for this, right? Like this code has there's no one has context on it, right? Like you have entire parts of a code base that are just written using a coding system, and yes, it's faster, but I think a lot of organizations probably aren't doing the second level analysis of what happens to my MTTR, or you know, yeah, how does my reliability or security posture change? I'm sure every SRE and platform team, this is probably the biggest thing they're stressed about right now is how do I sure my engineering productivity metrics are going up, but what's the full story, you know?
Yeah, I mean, I think the things that we just talked about, things like reliability, uptime, the ability to service the customer become more and more important, right? With like an AI first world, like you can't have your LLMs dropping secrets into your code and they don't even realize it. So are you scanning for secrets? Are you fixing vulnerabilities that maybe your coding assistant has introduced that you didn't even realize?
Yeah.
Like all those things are becoming, ever more so important. Except I think the difference now is that there's an expectation that you do all that and you're moving fast.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's the interesting shift in the landscape that we're seeing today.
Yeah, absolutely. It's it's going to reach a tipping point. I mean, you're already starting to see, I forgot which company I saw, someone prompt injected their AI customer support chat agent, and
saw that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's just like I think there's no doubt though that this is the next technological wave, and it's an unbelievable amount of innovation, but there's always, I think, with any new wave, whether it was mobile and cloud or now AI, it introduces just in immense amounts of risk as people quickly adopt these things without really fully understanding the end-to-end like life cycle for them. I'll tell you one thing that drives me mad though is when I see companies saying they're replacing engineers with AI, which is just total BS.
Yeah. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, the reality is that LLMs are just not there yet. But at the same time, this has been true for how many technologies in the past, right? It's, it would be, we would be sticking our heads in the sand to say that, AI is not removing the need for as many people in certain roles. I think that's the truth, right? It's creating more efficiency in certain areas, but it creates more demand in other areas.
Yeah.
And I think that's where like every technological wave has created some sort of shift in other places, right? You think about the migration to cloud, right? You needed fewer people who understood data centers and, how many companies were building their own data centers. But the flip side is all of a sudden you needed a lot more people who understood infrastructure and networking and cloud things and scaling and distributed systems.
Yeah.
Because now more companies could build distributed systems. It was cheaper to do that. A startup could spin up microservices and ship that on a 10 node Kubernetes cluster.
Yeah.
Where you in the past were probably running a PHP application on a single server rack sitting in a room somewhere.
Yeah.
And so it was just the shift from one type of work to another type of work. And I think that's what's going to happen in engineering as well. Like it's going to be, a shift from one type of work to another. You may need less investment in certain areas, more investment in other areas. What are LLMs going to bring up? Maybe you will have to invest more in reliability and security, and that's becomes so much more important. Or maybe you're going to have to invest in people who are experts in observability when it comes to LLM evals. I don't know. Like it's gonna be a different transition. I don't think we know the answer yet. But saying that it's going to just remove the need for engineers, like moving to the cloud made companies more efficient.
Yeah.
It didn't replace the need for engineers. If anything, it increased the demand for engineers, right? More companies could be founded, more companies could like take an idea and go and push it to the cloud. And it was so much easier to get started. And all of a sudden the demand for engineers went up. And so I think we're going to see the exact same thing happen with AI now.
100%. And, I think the interesting thing that we're even seeing with our own customers is that non-technical people for the first time are able to build technical products. And I mean, you're seeing the success of organizations like Replit and Lovable, and vibe coding, I think, has actually impacted non-technical people in the most positive way, right? Like they can build internal tools and systems and just spin up things that are going to help them with their day-to-day work. And even for our MCP server we just launched, I mean, I was surprised to see the reception from non-technical people like just embrace it completely, because now for the first time they can just ask questions and interact with the product without needing to log in or understand any technical concepts. And I think that's just a net win for everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes it easier for more people to ship things, enables more people to prototype, more people to self-serve things. On the flip side, I think, it kind of changes the expectations as well, because if you say, hey, non-technical people can build things on their own, the quality expectations for those things is probably lower, but the quality expectations for things that your engineering organization shipping is going to go higher and higher, because now people can do more, they can ship more,
Yeah.
and as a result, the expectations of the quality of those things, I think, is also going to go up. So I think
Yeah.
that's going to be an interesting transition as well.
You know,
I
sorry, one last thing on this is, the Coinbase CEO, he recently did an interview where he said he interviewed every engineer on the team, and if they said they didn't use AI, he fired them. I mean, what's your perspective? Like, if you're an engineering leader who, your team existed before AI, all this became a really thing. Like, how should you think about it? Was that too extreme of him?
I go back and forth on this a lot. I think there's probably some element of an industry aspect to this. Like, if you are a highly regulated industry, like you're dealing with health tech or financial services, probably be a bit more careful, or make sure you
Yeah.
have the right guardrails in place. You know, you probably should be using scorecards, for
Yeah.
example. Like, do you know how many of your repositories have secret scanning enabled? Are you looking at how many vulnerabilities there are? Do they
Yeah.
all have SLOs? That kind of thing. Having that visibility first is
Yeah.
probably really important. You don't want to just let people loose and be like, yeah, just, merge PRs. You have no idea
Yeah.
what they do. But at the same time, if you are an early stage startup, or you don't have those same kind of requirements,
Yeah.
yeah, you probably should be pushing people to. We were talking about speed. That's a way to increase speed. And so I think it really depends on the industry, but for the most part, people should probably be adopting it.
Yeah.
And I think what's important is it's not just for engineering teams. I think it's for everyone,
That's right.
right? People should be thinking about AI as a brainstorming partner,
Yeah.
as a way to sanity check thing, as a proofreader. I will say I hate reading AI slop. So
Oh,
if you are
disgusting.
a non-technical person who's using AI, please use it as a way to help you guys shape your thinking, and like, maybe write things. And so that I do think writing is a way of communicating, and
Yeah.
it forces clarity of thought. And so offloading all of that to an LM is silly,
Yeah.
but you should use that to help shape what you're writing, and then go
That's
write a
right.
thing. But you should be doing that. You should
Yeah.
be saying like, hey, I've written this document. What am I not thinking about? What perspective should I include?
Yeah.
I'm trying to close a deal. How should I think? There's so many things you should be doing. So I do think everybody should be adopting AI in those
100%.
ways. We're coming up on time here. Maybe a question from our perspective as founders. What advice do you have for engineering leaders who report to founders at, maybe the stage of company that we are, or even an
Yeah.
earlier stage startup?
It's a really good question. Engineering leaders, especially at our size of a company, it's a difficult role to be in, especially when you have founders who are trying to drive urgency and speed. Like, I joke about quality is super important, but you know, I mean, like, I will push super hard on an engineering team, right? To try to deliver as quickly as we can. And I think that's what makes our working relationship so great, is that we have a really good balance of, like, I'll ask for the world and you'll, help me realize what we can actually deliver. But I think a great engineering leader, uh, does the same thing, right? Like, they are able to they're able to understand the ambition and the goals of the organization, but you know set the tone on quality and what great execution should look like. I think great engineering leaders are very technical and can understand and help with system design. And at the end of the day, I think, especially as a team of 30, 40 engineers, you'll have a few staff level engineers as well who are spread across the team. And I think great engineering leaders earn their trust and are respected by your most senior member of the engineering team. And I think that means you have to be pretty technical, because otherwise, you know, I don't think people will take you very seriously. I think the best engineering leaders I've ever worked with are also extremely product focused. When I was working at Uber, some of the best engineering leaders I know, they could have been a VP of product if they wanted to. And I think that is a superpower that it's being able to obviously understand how to architect great systems, but know what to build for customers and be able to speak to them, right? Like customers like talking to the VP of engineering, and I think that's a great skill to have. So I would say, yeah, being very product focused is very critical.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if I had to give a piece of advice, maybe two pieces of advice, one would be, finding out how to maintain that speed.
Yeah.
Like we said, speed is the most important thing. And as a founders, that's how we made a name for ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Like we wouldn't be in a position where we could hire a VP of engineering if we weren't fast and shipping quickly. And so how do you surface risk? How do you surface when things are not quick and helping us understand why things are not quick? I think that's one really important thing. And I think the second important thing is helping us see around corners.
Yeah.
Like, we're always going to push for speed, but as an engineering leader, can you tell me what is the next thing that's going to break?
Yeah.
So, that I think that strikes a good balance, because you can say, sure, I can figure out how we're going to ship this thing really fast.
Yeah.
But I need you to give me room to fix this other thing, because that's going to break next.
That's right.
And if you don't want our team to be bogged down by the next thing, that we should go and make sure we're fixing that as well. So I think, being that person who can help us see around corners, I think also comes with understanding the product and being very product minded.
Yeah.
Being technical, understanding the limitations of our architecture, building the trust of your engineering team. But I think that's another piece of feedback that I would share. Well, I know we're at time. Thanks so much for having this. For listeners, they don't know that this is literally how we spend our time every afternoon. We just sit for hours and
we just record those
and talk about the journey, the market, where it's going, how we want to ship, the features we want to build.
Yeah.
And so it was really cool to be able to do this on a podcast, so people can get a little sneak preview of how the magic.
That's right.
The secret sauce behind
Thank you. Yeah, this is super fun. We'll definitely do it again.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thanks.
you.